In this video, we're going to take a look at North American buildings that were used as post offices, or some were termed federal buildings. I've only taken a handful, a lot from the major cities, but strictly focusing on North America, particularly the States. We're starting here with the Boston Post Office, 1874. Built, apparently, 1929, torn down. Pretty short lifespan for such a majestic building. So I'd like you, in my videos, to take a look at the infrastructure of the time, in the ones that, pictures that show it. Like in this picture, what are we looking at here? The horse and buggy. We got a streetcar, and we have the ridiculousness that this building here was inadequate, and by 1920 had to be torn down. So there's holes in the narrative, and I just wanted to bring you some of those holes. Also, you can observe the buildings around this building itself, draw your own conclusions, of course, as always. But I'm here just to illustrate the anomalies and the ridiculousness of some of the narrative. We have another streetcar here too, looks like. Okay, so that's Boston. Moving on to Philadelphia, Chestnut Street and Post Office, 1898 to 1939. Another real short lifespan. That's Philadelphia. Some of the dates I found for you are difficult to find and a bit vague, so I'll try and let you know if I'm not certain about what I found. So this is New York. I've got 1880 to 1939, New York Post Office. They dubbed this one Mullet's Monstrosity. Just a hideous building, isn't it? Let's have a closer look at the monstrosity. Had to be torn down. Could not go on looking at that thing any longer. It must have been just hideous for these poor people to even set their sights on. Good thing they tore that down. In Memphis, Tennessee now. Custom House and Post Office, 1876. Still stands apparently, but heavily renovated. You wouldn't recognize it as this building. So Memphis. Dallas Post Office. I really couldn't find much info on this one, although I do know it is demolished. No dates though. Des Moines, Iowa, 1871 to 1968. So made its way into the 60s. Not quite 100 years, but it made its way into the 60s. Here we have the horse and buggy, the dirt roads, perfect curbs. I suspect we have that brick and the rail cars underneath here as well, like we see in a lot of these other buildings. Montreal, 1878 to, not sure if it still stands. I couldn't find any info on that. New Orleans, a bit of a different look here. You see this in some places as well, but you have a lot of the Romanesque columns, a lot of archways here still, and just massive buildings, rectangular buildings, some of these. 1881 still stands. That's New Orleans. Cleveland, Ohio, 1910, still stands apparently. Oklahoma City, found it on a postcard. Quite a large building, 1912 they say this was put up, still stands. Although I suspect it might be a bit modified now. Oklahoma City. Denver, difficult one also to find. Some of these, the waters are quite muddy when trying to find information about some of these buildings. This is Denver. I got a build date of 1893 and unsure about what happened to it since then. Denver, Colorado. This one is in Hartford, Connecticut. Apparently completed 1882. Founded, no doubt. Torn down 1932. Lasted a whole 50 years. Again, we're looking at the horse and buggy days. And looking at quite a bit of established infrastructure. A lot of wrought iron. To me, these are anomalies for the time, the technology they had for transportation. I just, doesn't make sense to me how they had the infrastructure to pave these cities and build these buildings for the time. You see this a lot as well in some of the older photos. Looks like a power pole, but with multiple sticks or horizontals on it with little bulbs. And a lot of time there's no wires coming from them. Even this one, it's kind of vague. They almost look drawn in to me. The wire disappears here. So this is something I'd like to look more into as well. You see this in a lot of the older photos. This is Ottawa, Canada. 1939 still stands. I don't buy the 1939 for a second. Look at the surrounding area here as well. Got, looks like the Capitol building over here, just seeing a little bit of it. And you've got a lot of the same infrastructure here. Much older, also built into the street. So again, infrastructure. We need to really put this together and see it clearly. In my mind, it's obvious. It's part of the story that's being left out. Portland, Maine. 1867 to 1965 I've got for this one. This is that column and arch Romanesque style building, but you also have this, which you see on a lot of banks here in the Western world. Yeah, interesting building. It didn't make 100 years. Cincinnati, this one was a little tricky as well to find. I got basically a colored in, what was a photo I suspect, and it's been colored in to turned into a postcard. We're looking at the streetcars here in Cincinnati. Definitely horse and buggy days. This building, 1885 to 1936. So, squeaked out about 50, 60 years. This is Kansas City. I don't have any info on this one either. This one's difficult to get anything on. Quite the building. Very similar look to a lot of what we've already seen. And no doubt no longer standing or heavily modified, so we can't even recognize it. Providence, Rhode Island. And I don't have anything on this as well. Very similar to the last one, actually. Columns, arches, horse and buggy days, streetcars, serious statue work, a little bit of tech here in the background. Seattle, again, very similar look. I got a date of 1912. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. If it's supposed to be the build date. I don't have any information on whether it still stands either. So Seattle, other side of the country, west coast now. I'm sure they had some massive quarries out here on the west coast. Look that one up. Where did they find all this? Rail. They'll tell you rail. And the rail is an interesting story too, because I think all that infrastructure is part of this old world civilization that they're trying to bury. And what we did was dig out a lot of these railroads, or just found what was existing. That's for another video. This is the DC post office, built 1899, still stands, turned into a hotel. Quite the building. Why wouldn't you want to preserve that? Here's the Ottawa post office again. Notice here we have the street all covered up now. Interesting, as opposed to the postcard we saw earlier. And we get a sense for the Ottawa skyline here and what we're really dealing with the city. Much older, I would say, than what we're being told. Albany, New York, 1883 to present, still stands. Horse and buggy days, rail cars, tack here on the roof. See this a lot. Looks like a gate along the peak. Nautical windows, seen that before. Look at the bells. Oh no, they're not bells, sorry. They have these awnings, and you see those everywhere as well. The bells are for another story too. Duluth, Minnesota. Get that bit of a mud flood feel here. Buried windows feel, especially right here. Doesn't make a lot of sense. Here you're seeing what I mentioned in the previous video, and lines again look almost drawn in. Duluth, a lot of Duluth has this very textured looking, either it's concrete mold over red brick, or it's a stone. I tend to lean toward the mold myself. They fit too nicely, too perfectly for it to actually be individual blocks, in my opinion. I think it's a facade. I'm not sure, 1894 to 1934, 50 years. Augusta, Georgia. Horse and buggy days. We don't see any in here. 1880. Demolished in the 1970s. This is very interesting here as well. Something you don't see a lot of. This sort of ball figure on the spire. It's quite unique in my experience. Baltimore, Maryland. Mid-1890s built, aren't they all? Torn down in the 30s. Because maybe it's just too ugly for them to look at. Yeah, look, people throw some columns up here, right near the top. Don't worry about costing. We'll do whatever we need to do. This is interesting in the foreground too, right here. Part of a monument. That's Baltimore. Birmingham, Alabama, 1893. Was demolished, but I could not find the date. Birmingham. Chicago, Illinois. Supposedly built in 1905. That would have been before these horse and buggies. Before this horse here was probably even alive, right? They were chipping away at this. No doubt they had to dig how deep in the middle of the city to set the foundations for a building like this. Poor horses. Chicago, 1905 to 1965. Got a whole 60 years out of this building, did we? Just, it must have been maybe not big enough for all those letters. There we have, again, that same look. Romanesque columns. Front there, same front here. Arches down here. Nautical windows. Architectural style you can't miss once you know it. Chicago. Chicago, also referred to as Chalaga on older maps. Chalaga could have been the old world name for this city. Do a whole other video on Chicago another time. Here's Detroit. 1890s, this thing was put up. Apparently 1931 they saw fit to tear it down and maybe put in a mall parking lot. I don't know if that's the story with this one in particular, but it is the story with several of them. So horse and buggy days again here. Looking very castle-like, this one. Detroit. Louisville, Kentucky, 1889 to 1942. Architecture repeats itself. Maybe it was just government issue style of architecture for the time. 1890s, they had a real flavor for the Romanesque style buildings. And they must have had a really high skill level and a vast army of skilled workers to complete these tasks. Problem I have with that story is no one ever knows who the builders were. I'm not talking about the architect or the designer or the funder. I'm talking about the people who built these. The armies of skilled craftsmen lost to history. And that's why I am doing what I'm doing. Trying to help give a voice to those that have been forgotten to time. Here you get a bit of that mud flood feel as well. You got some windows down here. No doubt windows down there as well. Got a faded out building in the back as well. Some of that tech. Montgomery, Alabama, 1880 to 1968. This is the post office in New York, bearing a resemblance to a couple of the previous ones we saw. I think New Orleans, Seattle, there was another one as well. So you have the columns, get the arches. This is a massive, massive building. 1912 still stands. Pittsburgh, 1892 to 1966. Rail line coming down right next to it. And you have the very typical of the time, the infrastructure on the roads. Bricks or cobbles, depending, and perfect curb work. Sewers fully intact. There's a horse and buggy for you, just to give you an idea of the technology at the time. Got some basement windows on that one as well. Interesting. Port Huron, Michigan, 1882. Was demolished but couldn't find a date. Saginaw, Michigan, 1898. Demolished in the 70s. Scranton, Pennsylvania, 1894 to 1930. Almost got 40 years out of this baby. Horse and buggy. That's a lot of stone to haul for these horses. Nautical windows. Decorative statues. What does that look like? An eagle? With its wings spread? Scranton, Pennsylvania. St. Paul, Minnesota. 1880s built. Still stands. Very castle looking as well. Toledo, Ohio, 1880s. Demolished, not sure when. Horse and buggy days. Very similar features. Rochester, New York, 1889, still stands. This is interesting, this postcard. You get a sense for the texture of the either veneer or the stone. The age as well here with the vines. And you have what you can tell it's the same building materials as these ones in the foreground. Horse and buggy. Minneapolis, Minnesota, built late 1800s. Couldn't find a date for that. Not sure if it still stands either. You can see the tracks. on the road. And let's wrap this up with Buffalo, New York post office. 1901 still stands. Some interesting features on this one. Don't let your eyes deceive you, is my advice when going through a lot of this old history. I think what we've been told and what we can actually see with our eyes are two different things. But you come to your own conclusions. That's just me.